Okay. The Cthulhu Mythos. I'll just read the tagline here. Arguably one of Lovecraft's most powerful and enduring creations, but just what is the Cthulhu Mythos? What beings belong to it? What stories are mythos and which are not? And why, 70 years after Lovecraft's death, do writers still feel compelled to add to it? I haven't had enough caffeine today. So they made me moderate this, and let's start off with you guys introducing yourselves.
Well, I'm Will Murray, and many years ago I was a frequent contributor to Lovecraft Studies, Crypt of Cthulhu, and to this day I still write mythos stories. I'm also a novelist. My latest novel, Doc Savage Meets Skull Island, available on Amazon. And Word Slingers, which probably almost nobody here would be interested in, but it's a history of the Pulp Western magazines. And I'm the author of something like 60 novels and books, and I've always loved Lovecraft. Even when I drift out of the Lovecraft field as a participant, I keep getting drawn back in, as is the case today.
I'm Bob Price, and might be happy at the honor and pleasure of sharing the podium with these fine folks. It really is awe-inspiring. And, I guess you know, I'm a Cthulhu hobbyist, fanatic, and occultist, and eager to do more in the field.
I'm Cody Goodfellow. I'm a writer and publisher of Lovecraftian fiction and modern cosmic horror. My most recent book, and my first book as an editor, is Deepest Darkest Eden, New Tales of Hyperborea. It's essentially a tribute to Clark Ashton Smith's Hyperborea milieu stories.
Published by Miskatonic River Press, me.
Thanks for having me.
You like that? I thought you might, publisher horror. My name is Tom Lynch. I run Miskatonic River Press. I'm also an author and enthusiast of Lovecraft and have been for too long. We'll leave it there.
About a month now.
Yeah, at least a month.
I'm Mike Davis. I run an online magazine called the Lovecraft Zine. It's been around for almost 3 years now, and do a lot of other things on it too, blog about Lovecraft news and essays and so forth. So let's talk about this. What's the Cthulhu Mythos? Take it away, Cody.
Okay, well.
No pressure.
The Cthulhu Mythos is a wonderful distillation of the skeptical atheist materialist fear that he might just actually be wrong. Thank you, good night. So, yeah, it's wonderful, and it's amazing. I mean, whenever you want to kill a Lovecraft panel, just go down the line and go, okay, let's have everybody introduce how they came across Lovecraft. And you'll hear the exact same story about, the hair started coming out of my body and odd smells and weird urges, and then this book came along and seemed to have all the answers. This is what you're turning into, little boy. And so the Cthulhu Mythos is a wonderful metaphor. It's pulp existentialism, basically. It's looking into that void and looking at the unreasoning universe and saying, what if it actually is alive? It's just insane and it hates me.
Or doesn't hate you, but doesn't give a shit about you. It's entirely, it has no care for humanity or any other race for that matter. It just is what it is, and it exists and will continue to do exactly what it does day in, day out, whether or not you like it or whether you care.
Or as somebody once said at one of these events, you may say to me, Bob, how do I know great Cthulhu loves me? The answer is simple, he doesn't. You mean no more to him than an anchovy on a slice of pizza. But what a way to go.
I think you get to follow that.
No pressure, Will.
None at all. Well, I could start by saying a long time ago in 1986, I wrote a somewhat controversial article for Lovecraft Studies number 12 called An Uncompromising Look at the Cthulhu Mythos. I pronounce it Cthulhu because I've always pronounced it Cthulhu. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm not going to read anything. In fact, I tried to reread it and said, I didn't know that. So anyway, you know, as you know, everybody here should know, or is coming to know, the Cthulhu mythos is centered around gods, godlets, entities that are really more or less space creatures or or extra-dimensional creatures who are indifferent to humanity, but very interested in our planet for their own purposes. And allied with this are the Lovecraftian place names like Plateau of Lane in Asia, and Arkham in Massachusetts, and Dunwich in Massachusetts, and you know, Providence here in Rhode Island. And the nexus of the mythos started with Lovecraft writing about weird New England and gravitating towards cosmic indifference and cosmic incursions, things from out there, under there, or over there, or under the table, or in your cellar. And this became, after a very few stories, almost like a unbound round robin of an event in mostly the pages of Weird Tales magazine, but occasionally in other places like Strange Tales and Astounding Stories. And all of a sudden, Lovecraft's colleagues, comrades, you know, correspondents were adding to, sharing in, developing, undermining, twisting, overruling what Lovecraft had started, probably not with malice aforethought. Probably Lovecraft kind of backed into the mythos through several stories. And in my article from many years ago, I analyzed the point at which Lovecraft began, which is essentially with the Call of Cthulhu, the first great mythos story. Color out of space, which is tangentially mythos. The Dunwich Horror, which is probably one of his early great stories, along with the Call of Cthulhu. And at that point, he'd written only 3 stories, more if you count the Arkham stuff, which isn't mythos, but is retrofitted into the mythos because Arkham is a locus point for a lot of weird activity that's mythos related. And I made the assertion, you know, that these are the only 3 true mythos stories. Because once Lovecraft allowed other people to contribute, or not, maybe not allowed, but once other people began contributing, and he, you know, certainly didn't put his foot down, the mythos turned into everybody's game. And it's, all these many years, generations later, it's still anybody's game. He lost control of it. So my assertion is, wherever he was going with it, the introduction of other people writing, like Ashton Smith, who was one of the first, and August Earls, who's one of the more prominent. Once they started contributing, adding, subtracting, overanalyzing, the mythos stopped being Lovecraftian and became essentially a function of a school of cosmic horror, somewhat in parallel to the hard-boiled school of writing that Raymond Chandler and Ashton and a few others have been doing concurrently in Black Mask magazine back in the late 20s and early 30s. Anyway, I made that assertion a long time ago to create not only controversy, but a new thinking. And the new thinking is what was the mythos as Lovecraft saw it. It was limited to those stories in terms of no other outside forces intruding upon this fiction.
Cody, you had something?
Well, I was going to say, and I'm not sure whether he poached it from you or whether it's, you know, a parallel thing, but in Joshi's criticism, he draws a line between, you know, the Lovecraft mythos, which is the stories that take place within that canon, and then the Cthulhu mythos outside of that. And then to add to that, I mean, I grew up as a Lovecraft purist. I was thinking there must be more stories, but then so many of those stories were increasingly frustrating because they seem to either water down the thematic thrill of the originals, or to make it too commonplace, to make Cthulhu and his minions into another villain like Fu Manchu. It was in Bob's criticism that in his Chaosium fiction line, where he would stress that, you know, these stories that are contradictory, these stories that are redundant or way off into far afield, they make it into a true gospel. Because if you look at, you know, the multiple gospels of Jesus, there's very different slants on how his personality is, and some events are given more weight than others, and some are omitted. And so it starts to feel more like a real body of mythology, because there are these contradictions, there are these different perspectives. It doesn't all feel like it came from one prophet, as you said. Likening them to the prophets, the gospels, is a great way of looking at it.
Something that came to me the other day at one of the panels, I look at it a little differently than Will does, though it isn't really it's just a different way of cutting the pie. It's not a rejection of what he says, which I think is quite right. In fact, building on it at the same time, I tend to think of there's the original pure thing, exactly as he says, and then Lovecraft's, I gather Will is, as I remember, cutting off some of the things from the genuinely Lovecraftian mythos, because Lovecraft is incorporating all of these admixtures from others in a spirit of fun. Smith's Seth Agua and the Unaussprechlichen Kulte and Robert E. Howard and so forth, so that Lovecraft himself is diluting it with the added material. Well, it occurred to me the other day that that might be a good way, and it's fine with me. I like, as Cody says, I like the growing mega text, like Claude Lévi-Strauss says, that in all different versions of a myth as it evolves, there's a common, they form a mega text, and there is a common deep structure to them. So in a, I don't want to bore you even more explaining all of that, but that there is a kind of a subtle continuity, no matter how the many differences arrive in it. But Will's perspective made me think, well, wait a second, how about those pre-mythos stories that nonetheless feature Miskatonic, Abdul al-Hazred, and the unexplainable couplet, even the Necronomicon in a story like The Festival, yeah, and the Hound, the corpse-eating cult of Lang, the Necronomicon reference and all that. What about that? I mean, should you consider that a mythos story? And I know this sounds like just, you know, how many angels can dance on the head of a Shoggoth or something, but it matters if you are compiling books. Here's all the mythos stories, which I'm doing, in fact, so, oh my gosh, what goes in? And it suddenly occurred to me, it's like Lovecraft is borrowing from his own stories as he borrowed from Smith and Howard and all that. They weren't really written as mythos stories, and they're not even the seeds of the mythos, but rather he is casting around from material from colleagues like Smith and Howard to other stuff he liked, like Bierce and Chambers, and some of his older, simpler stuff. Oh, that would fit in pretty well here, but that, so I'm kind of reinforcing what Will says, that he really hits his mythos in the smaller canon within the canon, and I find it a little more illuminating that way somehow.
Well, you know, when we talk about the Cthulhu Mythos, or the Cthulhu Mythos, as Oshi would say, probably correctly,
Is there a correct way, Will?
I don't know what that is. I said probably. I said probably correctly, just to give everybody a bone to chew on. You know, early on, Lovecraft referred to his stories in his Arkham cycle. And the Arkham cycle is presumably any and every story that either took place in Arkham or referenced Arkham. And he begins Dunwich Horror with, you know, west of Arkham, the hill thrives. And I was on a panel yesterday about Lovecraft's, you know, New England. And there's some concern whether the two Arkhams, the pre-mythos Arkham and the post-mythos Arkham, are the same town. Because early on, it seemed to be inland near Dunwich, and later on it seems to be an analog for Salem, Danvers on the coast. So Lovecraft talked about his Arkham cycle. He never talked about a Cthulhu mythos. In fact, as the mythos evolved, Cthulhu receded into a less and less prominent entity. You know, essentially a trapped being under the vault under the Pacific, whereas Jon Sluthoff and Nyarlathotep these were the big guys. Well, maybe Nyarlathotep not so much, but at least he wasn't in jail.
Did Lovecraft himself, wasn't he kind of confused that other authors had taken to calling it the Cthulhu Mythos as opposed to the Yog-Sothoth?
And what makes him so popular, even though he was receiving, as you said?
Because he was the first story,
Well, and
inaugural
yeah.
entity.
Even if he's not the most popular, his story is the most iconic that seems to capture and tie together all of the themes of it. But he's also the place where they're most easily led astray.
Yeah.
But
Now, didn't Lovecraft once call his stories Yog-Sothothery?
yes, Yog-Sothothery.
Was the Yog-Sothoth cycle of myth his coinage or somebody else's? I've forgotten.
Dirk Mosick.
Dirk Mosick.
Though Mosick got it from The Whisper in Darkness, I think, where Will Arthur Akeley said something about the myth cycles of Yog-Sothoth and so, and Dirk got it from there, I think. And he said, well, okay, this is pretty close to what Lovecraft actually says. We might as well use it. It's funny how the Cthulhu Mythos term goes back to August Derleth, but that wasn't even his first choice. He said to HPL, hey, let's call this thing the mythology of Hastur. And Lovecraft kind of said, what the heck are you talking about? But he didn't propose any other name.
You know, we're trying to codify something that wasn't designed to be codified. Lovecraft had a body of work, including stories he didn't finish and may have thrown out through dissatisfaction, about which we know very little, as well as stories that were planned and never written. So in a way, we're kind of trying to take the fingers of a hand and say, well, this is this finger, this is this finger, this is this finger, when in fact it's someone's hand.
So, a question for you, Will. When we say the Cthulhu Mythos, are we really saying the cosmic horror stories that he wrote?
Yeah, I think that's what we are
Not
saying.
the other ones.
But, yeah, because that's why I put, Colorado Space in that category with Dunwich Horror and Call of Cthulhu, because it's clearly cosmic, even though no entities are named. There's some inferences that make you think, well, this is comfortably in the cosmic, category. But even then, the cosmic category is just the thumb on the hand. You have the dreamland stories and the poets stories and, everything else.
Well, it seems to me that's correct. If there is a mythos, that is a myth or a myth cycle, myths are stories. So what stories are you talking about? Well, Lovecraft stories of a certain kind, and perhaps those of other authors. But the mythology also, I think, legitimately refers to the what he called his pseudo-mythology of the underlying implicit system, not necessarily completely logically consistent, but the body of lore that is implicit in the stories into which they refer. So it's just a semantic difference. The mythos or mythology would fit each reference equally.
Yeah, so speaking of semantics, if we say something's Lovecraftian, saying that could be the whole body of work, those themes, but the Cthulhu Mythos is the cosmic horror.
To me, the description Lovecraftian captures more his. I mean, it could be. It's very numinous. It could be his style. It could be his body of work. To me, it works better to call Lovecraftian his style and then use Cthulhu Mythos as pertaining to that body of work.
Well, his style and his kind of his vision, his own ethos as to what he had to say, what he thought in terms of atheism and a complete lack of a caring universe, outside of there being any tentacled beings with pseudopods, etc.
Go ahead, please.
Willem Pugmire did a periodical for me decades ago, Tales of Lovecraftian Horror. He edited the thing and I published it. He had this guiding principle that submissions to this magazine should not be Cthulhu related, none of those names and all that, but if it had his general vision and or mood, voice, style, that's what he wanted. And I thought, boy, that is great, that's just what we need. I mean, I love and revel in all the crazy three-lobe burning eye, tentacle monsters and names and all that stuff. But he was right. I mean, you really need that, and if you have that, you don't really need the rest of it.
Well, everybody loves a mystery, and something it's the fact that it's secret, and the fact that, as Bob has so artfully pointed out, that Lovecraft was a master of the rhetorical striptease of what was it? It was mystery, miracle, and authority. Yes, he would demonstrate, nobody can understand this. But here, I'll show you a trick. And he'll show you something that blows your mind, and then step back and say, I've said too much already, I've got to go. and you disappear in a cloud of smoke. And that was, in effect, what he did. And it's amazing how so many of the people that came after him, most, if not almost all, kind of, as you said, overanalyzed it, loving it to death. Now, August Derleth loved it so much that he had to systematize it and draw a family tree where Cthulhu has a half-brother, and then Lumley, took on from that, and Cthulhu has a gold-encrusted Hello Kitty-looking identical twin who was a really hot human daughter. And Lynn Willis put it to me really well once when I was still writing scenario stuff for Chaosium. I sent him in a thing and it had like a Serpent People City, and you can see what their galleys are like and their pantries and everything. I was doing it like a D&D map, and he said, it's kind of like if you're watching a James Bond film and you see what the rec room, what Spectre's rec room looks like. And this is just an evil, nefarious organization, but the less you know about their health plan, the more compelling and intriguing they're going to be. And so the more of the mythos, and I said this at the intro to HBL panel, what to me really gets me about Lovecraft, his style, not just the mythos, but what infuses the mythos, is that he's able to have it both ways. He's able to describe something as being indescribable, I can't describe it, and then he autopsies it for you. And so you really do have it both ways. You really do have the less is more. It forces you to see something you couldn't possibly conceive of, and you'll never get the stain off of your brain, and yet he gives you the sense that there's that much more. And so people that have come after him that have managed to carry on and add to the Cthulhu mythos without shining light into all the corners and showing you where every dusty gear and cog and wheel is and where all the discarded gum is, have been able to add to it, but then add more of a sense of mystery, put that much more out there that is still and should never be revealed.
May I just make a reading suggestion along those lines? If somehow you have not read them, you gotta read Radiant Dawn and Ravenous Dusk by this guy. He's taken the lesson that he's just described. And maybe one day, if we pray real hard, we'll get the third volume.
You'll tell me what's supposed to happen in it.
Okay.
Will, I think you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm reminded of an article I should have refreshed my memory on. When I first got interested in Lovecraft, when I was first reading intensely, I was also going to college, and I took a course in Greek and Roman mythology, and I noticed parallels. This caused me to write my very first article on Lovecraft, the Dunwich Chimera, and other inversions, which was accepted by Nyctalops just in time for them to go on a long hiatus. It was ultimately published. And what I noticed was Lovecraft, in some of his stories, Dunwich Horror is a classic example, he took Greek myths and he inverted them. He undermined them. He turned them inside out like a sock puppet. And so Wilbur Whately, with the head of a goat and all these other attributes, if you know Greek mythology, he's a chimera. The three-part, creature. The fact that he's part of a twin goes to another Greek myth. I think Castor and Pollux, but I could be wrong. I've forgotten a lot of this information. And what was it? What's the story where the guy's feet are cut off in the tomb? That's the Procrustean bed. Yeah, so he's taking, and I don't say across the board, because he doesn't do anything like across the board. He has in his notes, he wanted to take the myth of the Oracle of Trophonius and turn it into a story. He never did. So he, in some of his conceptual thinking, he was taking ancient myths and updating them, modernizing, but turning them. Now, the Greek gods were capricious, and they could love you and they could hate you and they would certainly destroy you. They were above you. They were not, like Christian gods who were all love, or Buddhist gods or whatever. I guess there are no Buddhist gods.
No,
there are. Okay, well. The point is that his thinking, when we call it the mythos, we're not off when we say it's the mythos, because it was an evolving mythos. But its underpinnings were to some degree mythological, although to some degree it was founded in New England legendary and world legendary to some degree. So I don't know anybody systematically looked at all Lovecraft's stories in terms of those types of inspirations and inversions. But I thought that was very compelling enough to write my first article about it. And I still carry that in my head as part of the Lovecraftian thinking about how to do modern myths.
How about the stuff with Egyptian mythology, the thing with Nug and Yeb, mirroring the Egyptian Nut and Geb? That was really astonishing.
Yeah, I don't know where I got that. But Lovecraft, in a couple of revision stories, made mentions of Nug and Yeb, these entities. But they were in a lot of his letters, just in humorous, allusions, but sometimes he would list them in conjunction with Yog-Sothoth and Cthulhu. It made me think either there's a story he started or wrote or plotted involving those two creatures, entities, that never saw the light of day, or he was thinking ahead and he was going to bring in Nug and Yeb, because he talked about them as if they were already part of a pantheon that was already out there in the world. And so I wrote an article on, in fact I wrote some short stories built around those two entities, but I wrote an article for Cthulhu, or Lovecraft, or one of those things.
What's the difference?
It was all long ago now, in which I took every iota of information and assembled it and collated it, and then said, all right, what's he talking about? He seems to be talking about Nut and Geb, is it? From Egyptian mythology, and I've forgotten who they are.
They had cosmological functions that were oddly analogous to what Lovecraft said, which is what really clinched it.
So when Lovecraft takes and inverts myth, he's not just limited to the Greek myth or New England legendary, he's going to Egyptian myth, and then there's other things I forgot. So maybe you would have a better memory than I have, or whatever, years, I don't know.
When guys like Cody or Laird Barron write their stories, their novels, are they adding to the Cthulhu mythos, or are they writing cosmic horror? Or is that all just semantics?
Yes,
So,
both,
yeah.
I think.
Yeah, a bit of both. With Radiant Dawn and Ravenous Dusk, I was very consciously writing something that I would never go so far as to call it a sequel to The Mountains of Madness, but it builds on that cosmology, and it was fleshing out, looking deeper into what the old ones did, how they started life on Earth, how they managed it, and how it went awry. And I was trying to meet the challenge of doing something that was that would be not Lovecraftian in terms of style, but would be an unquestionably a Cthulhu Mythos existentialist called horror story. But to me, what really worked about weird tales wasn't just that they were weird, was that usually the best of them, the most distinctive of them, usually fused two pulp genres that were pre-existing and played off the expectations of them against each other. And so you'd see, horror and sword and sorcery, or science fantasy and things like that, and they would, the themes and the plot would kind of crumple and change and interlock in very interesting and surprising ways. I was trying to do something similar to that, and do a big epic weird tale that would take all of the genres that people think they're familiar with, techno thrillers and conspiracy thrillers and police procedurals and X-Files type of conspiracy, or X-Files type of occult horror, and play all of those off against each other, so you think you're in a very familiar world, because that's exactly what you should be, where you should be at, if in order to get the most effect out of a mythos story. It's funny, mythos stories don't play well with others, and if you do an anthology or a collection and you have maybe 20% mythos stories, you'll get raked over the coals for it. It's 80% other stuff. And it's funny that way that people can be that puristic about it, and yet when you're opening up the book, it makes it that much less surprising if you know exactly that you're going to be getting into something really shocking and exactly where it's going to take you. It kind of lessens the mystery. And so I was kind of trying to find a way to make it mysterious and nuanced.
I really did like what you said earlier about a big part of it is the mystery. I mean, Call of Cthulhu is a mystery.
Yes.
But,
Yes. Well, and there's a lot that we've assumed. One of my favorite pet theories, and I think there's another thing I quoted from Bob, is the notion that being that we see that comes out of Relier and gets impaled on the Alba's prow isn't necessarily Cthulhu, because nowhere does it say so. We only have this one eyewitness who wasn't very well informed account of it, and so thus, I mean, because Cthulhu, if he's just a great big thing that can come out of a city, he's kind of like Godzilla. And my daughter gets terrified of Sesame Street, but she loves Godzilla movies.
That's really interesting. I've never heard that before. Haven't heard you say that before.
Oh, well.
That it may not have been Cthulhu.
We should hang out more.
Yeah.
Because then that physical entity, as awful and as huge as that was, whatever Cthulhu is, he's still in there. He just sent out an intern.
When
Go answer the door.
Minions, you know you're out
See if
there.
they
Yeah,
left
he doesn't get his own
candy.
door. He has the butler do it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's some food outside. Go grab that.
That's right. You hear Dad?
Why do writers still feel compelled to add to this instead of maybe less marginalized?
Because editors ask us to write these stories.
That, and there may be times where you know you've got a good plot, you've got a good idea, you've got something good going, but you know what you want to evoke, you know a feeling that you want to have your readers, your audience to have, but you don't want them to go, oh, that guy, or something like that, or maybe it's even one of those ones, but you're not entirely clear. Little hints, because the greatest fear is what? The unknown.
Mm-hmm.
So let's not get out there and describe it all, because then it's not scary. But I think it's very easy, and in my case anyway, when I've done it, a hell of a lot of fun to add something that hadn't been there before.
Well,
but it's part of this.
I've heard critics say that using the Cthulhu mythos in your fiction, that it's a crutch, because instantly you have a ready-made toolbox of things that have a proven success in getting a reader response, and which I know editors. I've only found it recently that I'm writing more mythos fiction than I want to write, because I've been powerless not to write it. But to me, because I would never want to have to write a weak story where the only cool thing about it is the mythos stories. I hate those. To me, the mythos, it's more like having a pole that you can pole vault with. Because if you have a great idea for a story that needs to have that sense of anxiousness and outsideness, just as if I wanted to write a story about the savagery of human beings and our unacknowledged kinship with nature, red in tooth and claw, I wouldn't want to have to go out and reinvent the werewolf. So it's a way of grabbing onto these signifiers, and what you do with them is entirely up to you. But you already have these tools that can amplify what you're doing if you're mindful of what they should be doing, how not to overuse it.
Well, it's interesting that that's looked at as a crutch, but not writing a vampire story or a werewolf story.
Or a Western.
Yeah, or a mystery.
Yeah.
So, what makes a good mythos story? What makes a bad mythos story?
A good mythos story evokes, Cody said it, an emotion. A short story should produce an emotion. And a novel should produce multiple emotions, I suppose, but end with an emotion. So I think an emotional effect should be the ultimate goal of a short story writer. And what that emotional effect is, varies from short story. But in the mythos, it should be replicating what Lovecraft seemed to be trying to replicate in his fiction, a sense of cosmic fear or terror. I mean, if you read his letters, and this is something I've never written about, but maybe one day, he talks about wanting to achieve or enjoying the delicious feeling of horror in reading stories or writing stories or imagining things that some people would talk about trying to achieve the perfect orgasm. I mean, he clearly thinks fear, terror, mindless fear, cosmic fear, mind-shattering fear is some ultimate expression, aesthetic expression. And I've suspected, I think other people have also said this, that he may have suffered from sleep paralysis when he was younger. Because if you ever have sleep paralysis feeling or experience, unbelievable terror accompanies it. And usually in your waking life, your normal life, or even normal nightmare, you don't experience terror on that level in an ordinary, in an ordinary day. So I think, what makes a great mythos story is evoking something that's almost like transcendent terror. unprocessable terror.
Cody?
Yeah, and to me, it has to give you a sense of the age and the incalculable size of the universe, and that it has to reduce humanity not just to ant size, but to almost subatomic size in the grand scheme of things. And that it's funny, Lovecraft, and this has been beaten to death, but Lovecraft's so much of his terror comes out of seems to come out of a repulsion of, you know, not just the size and the strangeness of the universe, but of, you know, life itself. Of course, his terror of, you know, seafood and girl parts and dark-colored people, and all well documented. And yet he seemed to, there's this fascination repulsion thing when he really gets going, when it almost turns into a surrealist word salad, because his repulsion and his fascination are at war, and they almost seem to be like polar opposites that come slamming together when he really reaches critical mass. And with authors after him, you see some that have made the mythos kind of commonplace. You know, the old CCD are out to get us again, but there are some who manage to diffuse some of the fear, because after a while it's going to stop being terrifying. We're going to realize, yeah, the universe is boundless and it's billions of years old. I'm okay with that. But you see authors like Caitlin Kiernan and Michael Shea who are able to capture that sense of strangeness and infuse a little bit of a sense of beauty and wonder at the same time. It's a huge, strange, not human-sized universe, and we're very, very privileged to be able to see it. And so it's still there's still that chilling sense of strangeness and dislocation, but there's a little bit of a sense of wonder too, because you can only go on so far saying it's awful, I can't look at it, before we know you're peaking, you like it.
Yeah, when you really truly begin to understand somewhat, we can never understand the size of the universe. There is this sense of wonder, and there is this sense of terror. You know, overused phrase is, there's more stars in the sky than there are grains of sand on all the beaches in the world.
Does anybody use the phrase cosmic realism to describe Lovecraft? Because that popped into my head. I want to say he wrote about cosmic realism.
Better copyright that now, Will. That's a good one.
As if creating the term the Clark Ashton's Mythos was not enough.
Bug Shasher.
I love the thing at the beginning of the Call of Cthulhu, that the correlation of the revelations of science have hitherto harmed us little, but one day people piece this together, they're going to go crazy, and or go mad from the revelation, or retreat into the safety of a new dark age. Well, that exactly describes the reaction of many religious folks, though certainly not all, to evolution. That's exactly what happened, with the result that you have just utterly ludicrous arguments against evolution and so forth today by intelligent people who are just wasting their rational faculties in this kind of crazy O.J. Simpson defense team rationalization stuff. But I find that every time I think of the scope of the universe, this number of stars in a galaxy, the number of galaxies in a cluster, the number of galactic clusters, and the incomprehensible vastness, it is just daunting and numbing and damning. And similarly, the time element, every time I see a documentary on dinosaurs or even think of one, I think these dragons and giants ruled the earth unthinkable eons ago and for unthinkable eons. And we little lemurs in neckties just cropped up the other day, and it is really horrifying. I mean, there is wonder, but it really does, like in the Monty Python's Meaning of Life, sort of makes you feel insignificant, doesn't it? To say the least.
Why, yes.
What you're saying makes me think of something that I often bring up that sometimes people raise an eyebrow at, but I don't really think it's that crazy. Given the age and size of the universe, given the fact that basically we just got here a couple of seconds ago, relatively speaking, is Cthulhu out there? No, of course not. These are stories, but it's not inconceivable that there's beings out there that are basically that powerful that would look at us as that small. You know, what are you guys' thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, why not? Because how much of this universe have we explored?
Well, even on the earthly level, you know, if you go to an aquarium and you look at an octopus or a squid in the aquarium, an octopus has a certain heavy, ancient look to it with his hooded eyes and, you know.
They're
it's
wise. They look
yeah,
knowing. They know
yeah, they look,
everything you don't.
you can place on them a lot of attributes that may not be there. How do they see us? How do we see them? Switching places would be an interesting point of view, but the point is you don't have to go out there to see things that don't relate to us very well. You know, I mean, a dolphin, we relate to dolphins. Some people can relate to whales or smaller whales or whatever they call them. But something like a squid or a spider, I mean, these are really alien to us. Unfortunately, spiders are mostly small, but you know, an octopus is a really creepy thing. Really creepy.
Yeah.
There was and I'm not going to get into the subject because it's over here, but there was a woman who was channeling books years ago. I can't remember her name. Maybe it might have been Chelsea Quinniago. I remember skimming that book once and coming across what this person allegedly being channeled was saying was that the dominant standard for masculinity in the universe is a squid. I thought, well, that's interesting. That kind of gets Lovecraft too. So I sometimes wonder if Lovecraft, in his dreams or his deepest sleep, might not have been connecting to something that may really be out there, not necessarily Cthulhu, because he was writing fiction. And I don't subscribe to any theory that says he wasn't writing fiction, but I thought that was interesting if you want to put it in dreams, that maybe out there something squid-like is more the norm than human.
Star Trek 4 had that premise and it's very effective.
That's true.
Mhm.
There was a great future extrapolative nature documentary several years back called "The Future Is Wild" that moved forward in increments and just did extrapolations of how life would change. And in it was very much like a cosmic horror documentary, because the last mammals ended up being these mice that were farmed by insects and just kept inside the nests as a food source. And it wasn't for 200 million years, according to their projection, that another sentient race arose up out of the slime. And the next one after us, brachiating octopi. And they showed octopi swinging through trees and monolithic ears, and they learned how to work hammers.
Well, I only learned this morning from Cody that jellyfish invented television. So
Now I get it, okay.
that's why he's so stupid.
And that's why we come to these things, to learn things like that.
Valuable facts, man.
Who do you guys think, who's writing, we've talked about a couple, who's writing in small press and in mainstream press? What are some good novels and short stories maybe that don't get mentioned a lot, or you wouldn't think of it as? You know, for example, one of the things that comes to my mind is, talk big press for a minute, Stephen King's From a Buick 8.
Sure.
If you've read that, it's very Lovecraftian.
Yeah, or The Shortcut, or The Mist, for that matter.
Yeah, it gives absolutely no answers. Basically what it says, which I think constitutes, as an editor and sometimes writer, a good mythos story. You know, there's something behind the curtain, and it doesn't necessarily like us, you know, or we're totally inconsequential. So, and From a Buick 8, I think, does that pretty well without explaining a damn thing.
what is that title?
From a Buick 8. Numeral 8 at the end. But, you know, that's one example. What do you guys think? Any other examples out there? There, I mean, there's plenty, but... Peter Klein's just wrote a good one, too.
Well, you know, there's a couple of great books from an earlier period. There was Wet Bones by John Shirley and The 37th Mandala by Mark Laidlaw.
Oh, yeah,
And
just
both of
ordered
those
that.
guys later
Yeah.
on have done a lot of fantastic mythos work. They wrote them within about a year of each other, and essentially take a very similar premise where there are these ethereal or astral parasites that attach themselves to human beings. And in John Shirley's, because he used to write lyrics for Blue Oyster Cult and used to like to party, they were these entities that both feed on and spur our addictions, and so all of our horrible behavior. And so that the monkey on your back is actually this enormous pulsating jellyfish that's going, go get more. And in the 37th Mandala was a very similar premise, but it took it in a totally different direction. And like the author photo on the back of Wet Bones was taken by Mark Laidlaw. So there, it was weird. It was almost like a thing on the, at the Via Diodati on the shores of Lake Como, where they were just, had a rainy weekend. They're like, okay, astral parasites, go. And then they broke off. But they find a way to make the otherworldly and the inscrutable very personal. They find a way to make something that's very cosmic, and these things don't get commonplace. They don't get understood. They remain very mysterious and aloof. But they both found very different ways to make this one thing into a metaphor for what's wrong with us and why we can't seem to live in the universe properly. Because something's eating us. Or writing us.
Now we have an excuse for all the bad things we do.
Well, I've been in many anthologies in the last decade or so, and before that, I'm embarrassed to say I don't have time to read the stories of anthologies because of the press of work. So I know there's good stuff, because most of the reviews say other people's stories are better than mine, so I know there's good stuff. But I wish I had the kind of time. We're in an explosion, and we've been in it for about 15 years, by my reckoning, of mythos anthologies, professional, semi-professional, and otherwise. And there's so much stuff out there, it's difficult to consume it, as opposed to when I was first, collecting this stuff and reading this stuff. When the Arkham House books were first getting into real bookstores, before, there was hardly any Lovecraft in paperback. You had the two Lancer editions in the late 70s. It wasn't until 71 that you had the Beagle editions, and suddenly Lovecraft was everywhere, and that created the first modern wave of writing about Lovecraft stories. But, as I say, there's a lot of material now. It's difficult to absorb it when you have less free time than you do when you're in your 20s. So I wish I could name anything. The writer that comes to my mind as being an intriguing writer from long ago was Colin Wilson in his Modern Parasites. I thought that was an interesting modern take, even though it's not a modern book anymore, on mythos, a refreshing take on it. But beyond that, there's good people, and very prolific people, and not so prolific people, but I wish I could enumerate them. I can't. That's a long way of saying that.
I just read one I really enjoyed called 14 numerals, 14, by Peter Klein's, Clines. Very, very good mythos story, cosmic horror story. I wanted to open up to questions to all you guys. Anyone have questions for the panel out there? No?
Well, thank you very much.
We covered everything.
Pummel you into submission much quicker than you?
Speaking of these anthologies, I guess I owe the contributors and the would-be readers an apology. These gents and I, I guess I only edited the thing. They wrote terrific stories for an anthology called The Mountains of Madness.
Hold it up, Scott.
Oh, okay. I have seen it, but it's in, so far, a pretty limited edition. Thank you. It's got great stuff in it, but I don't know what the heck is going on with the publisher. It would take all afternoon to begin to explain the rigmarole, and I still don't understand it, but I hope the book will actually appear. I think you can order it on Amazon.
Oh, yeah, I ordered it on Amazon.
You'll get notified
when it
if
first
it's
came
ever
out, before it was supposed to come out. I ordered it then, and I didn't get one of those copies, unfortunately.
Yeah, there was a brief window there.
I'm sorry, if we would have waited a day.
Yeah, well, look at that cover.
Hotel. And this is a great illustrator. Mike had said earlier, had asked us, why are people still writing this stuff? It really is a compulsion. A lot of these other writers, like
topic.
Yeah, James Blaylock and a lot of these other guys who have thriving careers doing other things are drawn to at least drop something in there every so often. And some people are, otherwise completely fully functional adults are powerless not to do this stuff. And there are publishers who are, they're not really publishers, but they're so drawn to or compelled to put more of this stuff out there that they'll put themselves in a position where there's 20 angry writers with torches standing out on their lawn. And the writers are all thinking, he's ripping us off. It's like, no, there's no money. There's no money. We're not doing this for money. Are you doing this for money? Who said they're ripping money?
Sucker.
It's a madhouse with no exit.
You can't get rich writing this stuff?
Well, I mean, theoretically you can.
Theoretically?
Theoretically.
How does that work?
I don't know. It's theoretical.
Well, Lynn Carter lamented once that you really had to be Isaac Asimov or Stephen King to make a living at this, that even a lot of successful authors couldn't live on it, and that's always been a real encouragement.
Enjoy your last hot meal.
Hope you like navy beans. Yes.
Yum cans.
Just a quick question for the panel. We've talked a lot about Cthulhu Mythos or Lovecraftian mythos as horror. What do you feel about expanding genre? Can you have a successful Cthulhu Mythos story that is maybe not horror? Could you do a Cthulhu Mythos romantic comedy? Something like that.
You could. Well, you could if you're doing it as a parody, because the Lovecraftian mythos requires such a Herculean suspension of disbelief that we come to, willingly and avidly. But it's so easy to break that bubble. And so if you juxtapose anything mundane with Cthulhu, collect Call of Cthulhu, you can take those T-shirts out a whole new door. And so it's very easy to parody it. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I would say it's nigh impossible to do something like that that doesn't have the element of horror or that isn't using those things flippantly. I've tried to do. I like writing, pulp action stuff, and I've written a lot of new pulp westerns, and I try to balance the expectations of a pulp western where you have, you'll be following a heroic character from one story to the next, and he faces off against bad guys. To try and do something like that where the character doesn't rise above the monsters, what he's facing, he can't just triumph and it's not like foiling a bank robbery or stopping the Indians from burning down the town every time. And so tonally, yeah, it would get kind of strange. You could do something that starts out as a romantic comedy. Hell, The Thing on the Doorstep kind of starts out as a romantic comedy.
Once I wrote, as one of my crazy little magazines, Lurid Confessions, I had actual confession stories that Howard and Carl Jacobi never managed to sell. And then I wrote one as if Lovecraft had done it. It was written under the name Sally Tybald in a Theobald. And it was called I Wore the Brassiere of Doom. And it started out as the typical maudlin, silly confession story of the young girl who goes from the country to the big city and makes dubious associations, and eventually she's seeing these at the Mountains of Madness type crinoids, and it's only the elder sign stitched into the cups of her bra that protects her. And some guy in France did this hugely Joshi style bibliography of everything Lovecraft wrote in the court. No, I can't think of his name now. He thought he took this seriously and thought Lovecraft wrote it. So The Brassiere of Doom by H.P. Lovecraft appears in this.
I once wrote a Western mythos story for Darrell Schweitzer's Weird Trails, and I wrote it with my tongue in my cheek, but the characters didn't know that. So when they went through their horrific experiences and ended up being turned into cows, it's called The Cowman of Coburg, it's still a horror story. It's just, from the reader's standpoint, it's humor horror, but from the character standpoint, it's still authentic horror. It's just the way a couple of cowboys confronting aspects of the Cthulhu Mythos. They don't have a frame of reference, so they're going to act naturally, talk naturally, but it will be funny to the reader because how else could you do it? Well, I guess you could do it more seriously, but A Cthulhu Western has to be, I think, by definition, somewhere along the line.
Brokeback Mountains of Madness.
I suppose the other genre that's easy to cross over into would be science fiction, because if you have a darker science fiction, then that would be an easy way to go with that. But to not make it horrific would be difficult, because I think once you add that element, certainly into science fiction, you're going to be there. With Jeff Thomas's Pumptown work, it's all there, and it's very definitely Lovecraftian, even if he doesn't use the word Cthulhu, because he brought his own monsters to the game.
Brett Telley's The Void does that too.
Monstrosity is very influential. Yeah.
If Lovecraft would have lived, you guys think it would have been more and more science fiction as opposed to the straight horror?
Well, he's interesting because he was definitely getting more and more into science fiction, and yet he was resolutely opposed to resolutely committed to the notion that the future sucked. Not just that the future was going to suck, but that the concept of the future itself sucked. Philosophically, he said the past is the only thing that's real. The present is happening too fast to matter. The future is going to be, as he put it, barbarism deluxe. And so he was very, it wasn't a weakness in him, it was a resolve to turn towards the past. And so his science fiction stories still are always looking backwards and only looking forwards incidentally. So I think you might have seen more of that. I think he was moving further and further away from the Gothic and more towards something that was increasingly ever more existential. I mean, he would move further and further away from anything that you could recognize or define as good and evil. And at the Mountains of Madness, you alternate between being horrified by what the elder things did and just disturbed by the mere fact that they existed, and then feeling sympathetic for them, because those poor bastards are just making the same mistakes we're making.
The sad thing about Lovecraft is I'm not sure what his markets would have been had he lived.
Yeah.
John W. Campbell, who edited Astounding from 38 on, just after the Lovecraft's unfortunate appearances in Astounding, who also edited the fabled fantasy magazine Unknown, he was very anti-Lovecraft. He didn't think he was a popular or a good writer. So those markets would have been closed to Lovecraft. When Dorothy McAthelwraith, however you pronounce it, took over Weird Tales in the late 30s, early 40s, she did reprint some Lovecraft. She might have been open to them, but she was looking for more modernistic stories, especially as the 40s wore on. And other magazines were very short-lived, like Strange Stories, if it lasted a year. I don't know what he would have written for. Because, you know, the more time passed, the more people were turning away from, more editors and writers and publishers were turning away from the kind of stuff he was doing towards what we would today call more modern or more horror with humor or horror with realism. So, you know, I don't know what he would have done unless he found a hardcover publisher who would let him run riot. If he'd lived long enough, he would have come into his own, but in that interim period, who would have published them? What would he have written? I think it's almost an imponderable.
The 40s would have been, as hard as everything.
Yeah, the 40s would have been very difficult. I don't know how he would have fit in.
Paperback originals?
What's that?
Paperback originals?
Well, that would have been the 50s, and they didn't do much horror in paperback originals until the 60s. And even, you know, Lovecraft's appearances in paperback till those late 60s Lancer collections was, you know, very modest. Lurking Fear, Here, and, you know, even Merritt wasn't in paperback a lot until the 60s. I take that back, he was. But he was special, and also he was doing a kind of high fantasy. But, well, you know, it would have taken probably to the 70s or late 60s for Lovecraft to have been refound and rediscovered. And had he lived, would he be writing stories that were never published? Well, he seemed to care about being published and paid as much as any professional writer. So I'm not sure where his motivation would have come from if he didn't have markets.
He wasn't very good at asking for payment, as I recall.
He wasn't very aggressive.
No.
He wasn't very good at a lot of professional things. I mean, he was upset at how they treated him in Astounding, but any professional writer would look at the 2-column layout of a pulp magazine and would say you can't write paragraphs that go on for 3 pages. They have to be broken down. That's just magazine layout. He didn't get some of those practical matters. Just didn't. It wasn't part of his processing of things.
Any other questions out there? Yes, sir. Yep, you're,
How would you connect the dream cycle with the mythos?
Just about to say that.
Particularly, I mean, some of the early ones don't seem like they fit at all, and by the time you get to the capstone with the dream quest, I mean, it's almost, I couldn't even conceive of the mythos without the dream quest personally. So.
I agree with you, and that is one of those ones, like everything else in his stories, that he circled back and kind of put in that infrastructure connecting them. I don't see them as that far apart. A story I just submitted to Joshi actually seeks to try and bring that back, or ask the question of what the hell happened to the Dreamlands, because it's fascinating to me that as many fantasy milieus as are still very popular, that yeah, the Dreamlands has been all but trampled and forgotten in a rush to venerate the Cthulhu Mythos.
I loved what Brian Lumley did with the thing where the
Hero and
Cthulhu, the master of dreams, invades the dream world. That was a great idea. And you may not like Lumley. I used to not like him, but I've gotten to like him very much. And I thought, what a brilliant idea that was. It's funny how there are these unsuspected connections, because I am quite sure that the Dream Quest it has a lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs influence, because of course Lovecraft loved Burroughs earlier on, and then started lying and saying that he didn't, or I guess he changed his mind. It's the old anxiety of influence again, but it's obvious to me that Randolph Carter in the Dream Quest is John Carter, and the ghouls are the Tharks, and so on and so forth. And then on the other end of the thing, it's very clear to me that the Call of Cthulhu was suggested to him by Dunsany's A Shop in Go-By Street. There's certain important phrases here and there that you can see gathered together in his imagination. He said, okay, here's where I can use this and that and the other thing that you find in the Commonplace book. But I'm sure that the most Cthulhuvian of stories is based on a germ from Dunsany. So it is kind of artificial, though not nonsensical, to divide them up into different categories like that.
Way back in my uncompromising look at the Cthulhu Mythos article, I make the point that the gaseous intelligence called Signac, S''GNAC, is who appeared in the short story Celophias and the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadeth, two dream stories, could be related to, or even the same entity as the gaseous thing that comes out of the meteor in the color out of space. So there's a connection, a possible connection. At least it's a connection of ideas.
Yeah, this would sound far-fetched if we didn't know that Lovecraft actually did this stuff and made these links that you can see in this, like you compiled that time, the openings and closings of his letters, where you can see he's got all kinds of connections in there that he never got the chance to put in the stories. I've always remembered that and thought it was pretty interesting.
yeah. Over here, I have a question.
So we have these vast cosmic entities through a whole vast universe. Why Earth? Why do they love it so much?
That's a good question.
Because the author is an earthling.
Yeah.
That's his frame of reference.
My answer to that is that, yeah, absolutely, that's the reason. But my thought is it's not. It's just one marble in a whole set of marbles. So,
Yeah.
We're only aware of the Earth-based
right,
incursions.
right.
Well, if you look at the lottery theory that we, life on Earth happened here because all of the conditions were perfect. We're a very, very lucky planet-wise, and so yeah, there probably are very few planets that are habitable to certain forms of life, and so yeah, it made sense. The elder things would come here because it was a great place to start a farm.
I just saw Independence Day again in the hotel room the other day. I love that flick. And at one point, Data, whatever they call him in this, is saying that the physiology of the aliens is very similar to ours. They breathe oxygen and so on. And he says, which is probably why they're interested in our world. Or another one, I just watched Cowboys and Aliens in the room the other day. Why the heck are these turtle men coming to the Earth? Well, because they want gold. It's as rare to them. as it is to us. And that's just like in The Whisper in Darkness. So what are the crustaceans doing? Well, they need the metal for some reason. Once they discovered it, hey, we can use that.
Yeah, or they live, they live, you know, the Earth is their third world.
Yeah.
And what's the very popular movie from the 50s that name escapes here right now, where they're basically going to destroy us because we're misusing?
Day the Earth stood still.
Yes, I'm sorry, the day the Earth stood still. Yeah, there's not very many habitable planets out there, and don't screw this one up, but we'll take it away from you. That was.
Well, speaking to the habitability, non-habitability, we're finding, you know, bacterium and other little creatures sort of living in extreme environments now. So when we talk about inhabited worlds, we may have to expand that because we don't know that, you know, there are creatures living, you know, near super hot, you know, thermal vents under the sea and, you know, the edges of volcanoes. So
If you want to call that living.
yeah, and so, you know, just going to Lovecraft's gaseous intelligence, we don't know that the consciousness couldn't be seated in gas on some other.
Maybe they put Cthulhu here because on the grand scale, Earth really stinks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find curious a lot, besides all the fish in Lovecraft, is Earth has liquid water. You have the deep ones that live under the water. You have the other things that lived under the water, live above the water. One of the interesting things that I always found was Cthulhu was trapped under the water. It was something that could actually kind of bind him.
But he's not trapped by the water. He's trapped by astrology and some decorative tiles.
But the water blocks.
I use that backsplash in my kitchen, by the way.
As long as it's not. Yeah, no, and this is a criticism that's been leveled before. It just at the fundamental logic of the Cthulhu Mythos about why is he an aquatic creature trapped underwater. For that matter, why is he an aquatic creature who came from outer space? But it begs the question: what did they look like when they first got here?
Well, I think I can answer part of that. Why is he an aquatic creature trapped under? The Old Norse legend of the Kraken slumbers under the water until the end of the world he rises to, you know, either take dominion or, you know, have a last feast, whatever the
I think
another inversion.
Yeah, I think the fact that he's underwater is less important than that it's the most inaccessible place on Earth. It's a place we can't go. He'll come to us. We're never going to get to him.
Yes, Victor.
I was kind of hoping you guys could talk a little bit more about nominal myth making and what gets included when it kind of gets taken over by a group of people. Also specifically regarding the difference between professional writing and fan fiction.
The difference between professional writing and fan fiction is very hard to demarcate. I've written fan fiction that's ended up being reprinted in professional books, so, you know, right there's a distinction without a difference.
Professional writing is just really good fan fiction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, what makes it, I mean, if you go to fundamentals, what makes a short story? A short story is the story of a protagonist with a problem who must solve the problem through his own efforts. That's the definition of a short story. The protagonist can be an ant and not just a human being in the problem, or the antagonist can be weather and not just an enemy of some kind. So right there, if a story doesn't stand up to the test of what makes a short story, it's by definition amateur. But I don't know how you otherwise make that distinction, except you could say, well, everybody says that's a bad story over there, or that's amateur.
It's Spanish, yeah. It comes down to the ingredients. It's a whole continuum, whether it's, you know, that level of professionalism or craft versus love. And so, you know, something that's utterly pure fan fiction will be all love and very little, very studied craft.
Well, and also, I mean, I've gotten compliments on the Lovecraft Museum. What a great fan fiction magazine that is.
Does that feel like a...
No, it doesn't feel like a compliment, because
I was gonna say,
when
it
you're
feels
writing
like
mythos stories are not fan fiction. If you're a Superman fan and you write a story about Superman, that's fan fiction. You know, mythos stories aren't. It's not a character. It's a theme. It's an atmosphere. So.
Oh, by another token, anybody writing in someone else's world, universe, style is, by definition, some kind of fan doing some kind of pastiche. So you could say it's all fan fiction if you want to do that. Which is why these distinctions are difficult, they're not impossible to codify, because depending on what standards you want to bring to it, how extreme or how loose, it all is, none of it is, some of it is, most of it is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to get it at a bottom line there.
I think as a professional, if you're approaching a story, you're going to be perhaps a little bit more mindful about how it will be received. Whereas if you're a fan, you're so in love with the idea and the thing and playing in that universe that you just run out there, and whether or not you remember your pants, and you have a good time playing in the sprinklers. But it's all in gradations, and so with professionals, we're still doing it. It has to have a sense of play about it because it's entertainment. Nobody's reading this for their daily medicine, so there has to be a certain degree of fanish love for it. So
yeah, I'm writing a Batman mythos story. Yeah, that's fan fiction. I'm never going to submit it anywhere. Probably no one's ever going to read it. I'm writing it because I think that's a great scenario. But yeah, that's fan fiction.
But there's a lot of very solid craftsmen professionals who've made their bones and their whole careers and all their awards just working within the Batman mythos.
Mm-hmm. And they're paid.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they have a big banquet every year at Comic-Con for everybody working in DC for Batman. And I've got a buddy who colors Batman. I was like, take a picture. And it's a big, long, ridiculous table with like 150, 200 people on it. And it's not just like Cthulhu Mythos people just doing Batman.
Did they have another one for all the people ruining Batman?
Those people had to sit on the right side of the table.
Ben Affleck.
Oh my God.
Yes.
You're talking about fan fiction. A lot of Lovecraft's work is kind of fan fiction. We have things like Dunsany, Poe, all these influences, and he's really taking those elements and kind of making fan fiction.
Well, I would say by a very loose definition.
Well, he did reinvent it. There's a character in Dunsany or a deity called Manayud Sushai who sleeps in a cave, and there's a drummer who plays this very slow hypnotic rhythm to keep him asleep and dreaming, because the dream that he's dreaming is the universe that we live in, and if he ever wakes up, it's over. And so clearly that made an impression on him. And but he found a way to sublimate that and reorganize it according to his own fascinations and repulsions and stuff. So he did rework those things. There's a lot of times when I read something that I really like, or when I hear a song that I really like, because I also do music, I'll think I really want that. I want to get that same effect, and I'll try and figure out how can I get 2-3 removes away from that. How far away can I get from it, or how far away from it do I have to get from it before I can still get that effect, but nobody's going to go, hey, you just stole that from me.
Right, the blurred line between influence. There's that blurred line between influence and if you're writing fan fiction, for example.
Yeah.
Any other questions out there? We got about 15 minutes left. Yes, ma'am.
What would you guys consider the story that had the most influence on you of Lovecraft? If you had to say this is the one that really turned me on to him, or made me want to write more, or if you just said this is my favorite of all of them, you had to choose just one.
The Dunwich horror for me.
Mountains of Madness.
Haunter of the Dark.
Shadow Out of Time.
Shadow Out of Time and R.H. Barlow's The Night Ocean, which Lovecraft
That's the
contributed
reading
to.
list for tomorrow morning. There will be a quiz breakfast.
Any other questions out there? Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role of the individual in your minors and Minecraft stories. There's sort of this weird dichotomy where, the individual is so insignificant in the face of all this. And at the same time, when you're writing a story, sort of paradoxically elevates the individual to get a glimpse into, the larger universe and, are sort of created and enforcement because of it. But, it's sort of, at the same time, you're sort of elevating these individuals, and there's this larger horror of being insignificant and having
Elevating them only to, bring them down again, because it shows off individuals as insignificant in a way, because it brings them out and says, here you are, and there's what you're up against. Good luck.
One of the things that Lovecraft was very disinterested in fleshing out his human characters. He went to great pains to give you a sense of place and atmosphere and history. And a lot of times his characters kind of fall by the wayside. It's sort of an empty chair that you're going to be sitting in. And there's sort of the prototypical image of the Lovecraftian protagonist as being kind of a persnickety, sort of a know-it-all. But they have no real other pursuits outside of the pursuit that leads them to their ultimate downfall or madness or transformation or hideous self-discovery. And so, doing it now, it's really incumbent on you to really drive home that these characters, these people do feel that they're at the center of their universe. And so it really is a shock. And taking you through that, that's where, if you're doing that right, that's where Cthulhu Mythos can really speak to you, because ultimately, with all horror, we want to know, what am I going to feel? What am I going to be thinking when it all comes crashing down, or when I suddenly realize it was all a lie anyway? What do I have to expect? Who's going to be my friend? Who's going to be my enemy? How will I know? And so, with Lovecraft, it's more than just the, what if you lost your son or daughter or loved one, or, the zombies came back. It's what if everything stopped meaning what you thought it meant, and how to discover that. And so, yeah, I think the more that you build into that, having the characters, having at least the sunny illusion of their own significance going into it. Otherwise, yeah, if you just have the two characters, looking at each other, we have no faces, we must find a larger entity to step on us, then yeah, it's just a sad procession.
Well, there are some stories where it is a kind of Faustian, a devil's bargain, and seeking enlightenment means finding your doom, like George Gamble Angel in Call of Cthulhu, and the narrator. He anticipates being killed soon. And then there are stories where the protagonist is converted and becomes part of this threatening scenario, like Olmsted, the narrator in the Shadow over Innsmouth, and Delapore in The Rats in the Walls, and others, I guess. Then there are some where they seem to symbolize humanity able to rally and hold the darkness at bay temporarily, which is like all you can hope for, but you can't hope for, like Dr. Willett, Wilmarth, Armitage. These guys actually do win, though it's pretty clear, it's just we won this time, but that's the way all victories are. So there are different signals, not incompatible, about the role of the individual.
That's one of the things that to me continues to be anathema that drives me bananas. If there's one thing that makes me want to throw a Mythos story at its author, it's when the mythos is something that has to be stopped. They're going to perform a virgin sacrifice and Cthulhu's going to come back.
Yeah, I agree.
No, one day the stars are going to come right and it's going to rain frogs and it's never going to stop. And you can witness that, you can get right with that, you can individually go poke some frogs, and that might make for a couple of heartwarming episodes. But the season finale is really going to be a downer.
Because in real life, that's what's going to happen anyway. It's not going to be Cthulhu.
Eventually we all will lose, and
yes,
that's important.
The universe will not, the entire universe, as huge as it is, it will lose. So, yeah.
And then it'll become something different. And what you said there, actually, what I was reaching for earlier when I was talking about some of the newer authors that had that sense of wonder and beauty, it's funny, the conversion of Olmsted at the end, because whereas Delapore in The Rats in the Walls degenerates into jabbering and insanity, Olmsted discovers a sense of serenity and peace, and more than that, poetry. The end of that is really quite beautiful. It's creepy and chilling, but not for him. He's finally found home.
I was just going to say, maybe that's, in a way, that's his insanity, or maybe that's kind of the horror. He's separated himself from reality.
Is it horror or is it enlightenment, though? Because he's one with those, he's finally understands, or he's going to understand those secrets that the octopus understands.
Right, well, I mean, it's either, ultimate enlightenment or checking out, or both. Maybe they're one and the same.
Yeah. It's all in the three-lobed eye of the beholder.
I think Lovecraft's limitations as a writer go to this. I mean, he could only write protagonists who were analogous to himself. Let's face it, the guy was essentially a giant intellect eternally curious, eternally questioning, but his body and his associations, although important to him, were in some sense of his mind. It was more of a mind than a body, or less integrated than most of us. And so when he wrote about protagonists, they would reflect a certain emptiness of personal experience. Therefore, he wouldn't write about a cop or a detective, a real cop or detective encountering these things, because it was outside of his...
Well, he did earlier. He did like the temple and he attempted to
Yeah,
get
but
German
that's-
soul. But he got less and less interested in
Yeah.
others.
Because probably in his earlier stories, he had more potential to grow as a human being. But
Yeah.
once he got in the middle age, he was who he was.
Yeah.
So, you know, in a sense, his stories could be called a metaphor or an exculpation of the fact that even an intellect who detaches himself from a lot of, you know, social expectations like family, children, etc., job, you know, the quest for knowledge, the acquiring of knowledge is going to come to an end either in death or in the fact that knowledge may take you somewhere that shows your limitations, self-knowledge. That he may have lived long, he got to the point and realized he may have squandered a lot of his life pursuing knowledge for its own sake, which has very little application in his actual life.
Less severe or not.
You know, he didn't do anything but write stories and letters and seek more knowledge. So everybody's doomed in his stories because to some degree he's doomed because his quest doesn't have a goal or definable.
Probably have time for one more or two more questions at most. Anybody else have a question? Yeah.
Could any of that have been on purpose? I mean, it seems to me that it kind of goes with the question from before, but the human is almost the grounding banality to make the otherness that much more extreme. So it almost seems purposeful sometimes to ground the reader.
You know, to ground the
The
reader.
human being so boring and whatnot makes the otherness of the elder things or old ones that much more extreme. So the banality seems sort of on purpose.
You know, or an accidental, you know, outgrowth of
Yeah.
the writer's limitations, I suppose. But, you know, he's not going to write a story from Cthulhu's point of view because then he couldn't do it accurately.
Well, and he doesn't, and two, he never starts out a story with, you know, Ted was filling up the gas station and then he went and got a Slurpee. You know, he starts out with a hysterical warning that, what's in this? You don't read my story. And then he starts to tell you what happened.
And then he writes the story. Now, I hope no one ever reads this.
Yes, yeah. Burn it!
Yeah.
Okay,
So why did you write it? One more, then. If then, yes, ma'am.
So it's kind of a weird question, but most
Perfect.
Most mythologies have a set of symbols and sort of an overarching, like, describing how the world works or how it doesn't work or create a purpose or a meaning. So how do you think the Cthulhu Mythos fits into that? What are its symbols and what are their purposes?
Well, there's not really, that we know of, an overarching purpose. And I think it's very important that if there is an overarching purpose, that it remain mysterious, but we understand, you know, who was here first and how they created life as an accident or a joke, and then just kind of the sweepings from their laboratory ended up taking on a life of their own and became our ancestors. And so there's, you know, and then at the other end of it, the entities, the Ithians will take possession of an insectoid race, you know, before the sun goes out. But there is this sense, there is a sense of the aimlessness of it. It's just this endless panoply. You can contrast that really neatly against another cosmic horror-ish milieu that is rife with purpose, which is like the Marvel Universe situation, where, yeah, with the Celestials and the Deviants and the Eternals and everything, where there was a purpose, where the Celestials were cultivating these beings that would stop Galactus from eating the planets and stuff like that, where Galactus is, you know, the alternate to Cthulhu. And so I think you see in that, you see something where, like, it seems very conceivable that Stanley and Jack Kirby were looking for a place to put that love of cosmic horror, and yet make it not so quite so dark to where a guy in a wrestling singlet still matters. And so I think it's stark, resolute hostility to any sense of purpose. The Earth isn't for anything. Life is for its own sake. If there is something going on, we're probably better off not knowing what it is.
Dirk Mosick, the great prophet of Lovecraft criticism, put it real well. That I think Cody is right. And Mosick said, well, the old ones are symbols of these cosmic forces, unmindful of us, that will one day inevitably destroy us without meaning to or having any intention.
Well, yeah. Oh, there's one more that to me, because to me, I don't call it that, but I do think of it as the Yog-Sothoth-oriented universe, because he's the anti-Cthulhu, whereas Cthulhu's in prison, not going anywhere, not doing anything, just giving people bad dreams and costume jewelry. Yog-Sothoth is not only free to go anywhere, it seems like he is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And so he's almost like the interstitial fluid between dimensions or between universes. And so very much either you know that space between spaces has come to life, or it's you know a vestigial intelligence of the universe itself. And so you can almost kind of come full circle to like New Age mysticism, where the Earth or the universe is this sleeping giant itself and striving towards a sense of self-awareness. Actually, I think this is a Bill Hicks acid trip routine, but that we are an organ of perception that the universe uses to try and see itself and become aware of itself. And that you know, we're moving towards, as the universe slides into greater entropy, that somehow the galaxy, the universe, is struggling to wake up from this sleep before it destroys itself.
Well, I think you got something, and then we'll be done.
Yeah, historically, most myths have been attempts to make an inexplicable world, reality, explicable, even if the explanation is obviously superstitious or supernatural, because you know pre-scientific people had no great ability to understand thunder and lightning, except as the Norse saw it, that's Thor and his hammer. So that's a way to make the frightening understandable by creating myths. In the mythos, it's inverted again. It's like, you know, it's like, what does this mean? It means everything is meaningless from a human perspective, and everything is moving towards a higher purpose that doesn't involve us. That in fact crushes us up. So it's an upside down mythology in the sense it's not to our benefit to understand it. It's to our detriment to understand it, which is why so many Lovecraftian protagonists go mad, because once they have the key to the universe, they realize it's like a hand grenade.
And on hand grenade, thanks for being here, everyone.